5 of the Time Traveler's Wife, Henry is just, specifically 28-year-old Henry, is just trying his best to live up to all these dreams and fantasies that Claire has. And between meeting her friends and meeting her family, he's just struggling under the weight of the comparison to his 30, 40 plus year old self. So to begin, let's talk about Claire's friends. Claire's friends are Clarice and Gomez, and unfortunately, Claire has a complicated relationship with both. How? Well, after she slept with Henry when she was 18, he disappeared for 2 years, and seemingly to compensate for that lack of physical intimacy, she slept with both Gomez and Clarice. Neither one seems to know that she slept with the other, and to make things all the more complicated, Clarice and Gomez are in a relationship. And while Clarice maybe just has a strong emotional bond when it comes to Claire, Gomez straight up says he's in love. Thankfully, within 2 years, Henry comes along, and while Gomez is jealous, Claire and Clarice seemingly write that off more so as like a big brother thing, or at least Clarice does, and Claire just kind of never minds it. But while that's something easy to kind of shoo away, it becomes very complicated when Ingrid, who is 28-year-old Henry's girlfriend at the time, she comes into play and kind of pressures Claire, or else points out that Claire is not in love with this Henry. She's in love with a Henry from 10 years from now, and with her knowing about the whole time traveling thing, it really pushes a lot of people to be uncomfortable. But for the most part, Henry's always in a state of being uncomfortable because his older self, the 41-year-old Henry, shows up. And with that, Clarice and Gomez find out about him being a time traveler, and it leads to this very awkward moment of, Gomez becomes Henry's best friend in the future. Clarice is around in the future, so Ingrid's kind of wondering, if you're married to Claire, you're best friends with them, what happens to me? And the answer pretty much is that she's not going to exist. Now, why is not made clear, but it is shown that she does cut herself, and it leaves you to wonder what's the final straw going to be and whether or not Henry is involved or not. Which leads us to the next episode, which deals with Henry meeting Claire's people, and you can tell that a lot of these, like, let's meet the family and friends things, Claire's not fully thinking through, because from what it seems, this is all within a span of a year, because it's not showing us that Claire got up in age or that Henry got up in age. They're still 20 and 28 respectively. And it's overwhelming, it seems, because Henry, when he meets her family, her older brother Mark is a lawyer in the making, is asking all types of questions. When it comes to Philip, who's Claire's father, he is also a lawyer, and he's doing the usual generic father questions, what's best for my daughter. Lucille, we find out, is definitely someone who's, what's the word I'm looking for? I want to say superficial, but that's not the specific word I'm looking for. But let's just say, with Claire wanting to be an artist, Alicia, who is Claire's younger sister, being a hairdresser, having her oldest daughter marry a man who is a librarian, compared to all that Lucille has, which is a house that has an actual name. She's like, he's cute and everything, but what does he offer you financially? And even Nell, who is the cook, she kind of questions that too in a way, because Claire notes that Henry has potential, but as anybody who's ever been in a relationship knows, you can't really marry potential, and potential sometimes never gets realized. Sad but true. So with that in mind, things are difficult, and what adds on to it is that Claire is still very much stuck in, one day he's going to be 41-year-old Harry, one day he's going to be 41-year-old Henry. And with that in mind, Henry of 28 years is like, so is it like Ingrid said, like, you're not going to accept who I am at this point? You're just going to keep perpetually waiting for me to be this man who you dreamed up all these fantasies about that potentially I may never add up to? I mean, granted, we know that eventually Henry becomes this person, but there's always that question of why and how. Because in this episode, it kind of makes it seem like Henry only becomes this person because, it's either that or he has to deal with an unhappy Claire, and because he's been told this is your destined wife, he decides I have to be everything that the older me is. And you can already see with 28-year-old Henry, he kind of wants to rebel against all these destinies and fates that he's supposed to adhere to. But it seems after a certain point, he just gives up on it. Yes, when he ends up time traveling to 2022 and then coming back with all these bruises and everything, he kind of plays with the whole situation, especially since Claire came up with a story and he wants to kind of make it seem, well, I don't want to say he wanted to intentionally make it seem like Claire was abusing him, but you can tell he was getting his kicks a little bit. Either way, what their episode really showed was that Claire is starting to come to the point where she's forced to realize that these fantasies she's built up, she's going to have to start to dismantle them if she really wants to be happy with this man. Because otherwise, she's going to be stuck in this fantasy world with a person who may try his best, but he will never live up to all that she's built up for the last 14 or so odd years. When it comes to these two episodes, it's really just on the fence topics for us. First and foremost is Ingrid and just feeling like we should have got more out of her, because it feels so disrespectful when you introduce a character who's a cutter and things like that, and then you just ship them off. I mean, she is possibly Henry's first love, and I know the show is called The Time Traveler's Wife, so why should we expect to see the time traveler's journey to his wife? But in order to understand one thing, you have to see the other, right? In order to understand how he became the man that Claire loves and adores, you gotta see how he was in his previous relationships. And I'm still trying to figure out, from the small version of himself when his mom died to the one that was having sex with himself to now this 28-year-old version, how does one become the other, and how does one handle the time traveling and everything else? Because thus far we only saw the 16-year-old version when he was off. We don't see him ever again after that. He doesn't visit the kid version, he doesn't get flash forward into the future, so what happened to that age range? And on top of that, in terms of the kid, in this episode, we saw the 28-year-old version get sent up to 2022. So did the kid ever get moved further up into the present day? Because the way that I thought it was going, you only go into the past, you don't go to the future. But apparently that's not true. So I'm a little bit confused there. And getting back to the Ingrid thing, I just wish that more was done in order to show her place in Henry's chapters, since I don't know if she's someone he just met in school in his 20s, or whether it's a case of him playing whether it's a case of her playing a major role, because right now we know that Henry told his father that he was a time traveler and Ingrid knew, but if Ingrid was the first person he told who wasn't family, I feel like that's a major thing for him to learn how to trust somebody who's not a time traveler, who's not family, and not getting to have that, it feels like we're missing a part of Henry's story. But for the second on the fence, it's not like Henry's alone in this. Generally speaking, I feel like a lot of the characters that we meet that are part of Claire's life, we don't really get to know. Clarice is nothing more but the best friend who apparently has feelings for her. Gomez is nothing but the guy who has feelings with her that is dating her best friend. When it comes to Mark, Philip, Lucille, and even Alicia, it's like we got to meet them, but we didn't get to know them. And that's a bit of an issue for me, because from what it seems, we only have one more episode after this, and it just feels like this is going way too fast, and it's not really getting to the meat and potatoes of everything. All we're getting is the soup, for lack of a better way to put it. And it makes it so you can't really connect to these people. And I would even say when it comes to, which might be a on the fence topic within itself, Claire and Henry's relationship, yes, we've kind of gotten out of that stage of making it feel like he was grooming her, and I can feel like we're getting past that. But I don't often think of them as a couple who you want to root for, romanticize or get butterflies about. Increasingly, it's just this vibe that Claire is in love with an image. Henry, who feels bad about the situation or all that he isn't, is trying to fit into this image. And it makes me wonder, is he going to just step up and become this person, or is it going to be a lot of misery involved on his way to being that person, with back and forth fights, possibly breaking up, making up, and then him eventually being that 41-year-old guy that she's dreamed of for almost all of her adolescence, teenage years, and early adult life. Which leads us to the overall feeling that I don't know. I'm feeling very much on the fence when it comes to the show right now. I appreciate Henry and Claire to a certain degree, but once we leave that bubble of their relationship, things get kind of weak. We don't get to have good supporting character development. The situations that they put Claire in, well, I should better say, the situation they put Henry in terms of him popping up places, being that they're not really going into why he's a time traveler, it's just he is a time traveler. It leaves a lot of questions involved. And then when it comes to why we only get to see him up to a certain age, which I think he's in his 50s or something like that, I can't remember offhand. It's just, I don't know. I just think that as much as it seems like we're going to get a season 2, assuming this is a hit ratings wise, I feel like if the next episode is the final episode, season 1 is going to feel very incomplete and very rushed.